So thank you so much for this honor and the privilege of inviting me to address this exceptional group of people. I'm so grateful. So when I first realized that the slot for the keynote was half an hour, I thought, oh boy, that's a really long time to speak. And then I realized that given the subject matter, I could probably go on talking for several hours. So if I'm left unchecked, so I guess what I'm really saying is you're very lucky that they've put a time limit on me. And so here's the thing. The focus of this talk that I want to have with you today, because I'm envisioning this as an opportunity to talk with you and not at you, is on philanthropy in a changing global order, about global governance, peace, and cooperation. And believe me when I tell you, all I've been thinking about lately is on how to change the global order. So by way of introduction and to help contextualize what I will spend the next 25 or so minutes talking with you about, I am Naila Farouky. I lead the Arab Foundations Forum, which is a network of Arab foundations, NGOs, and civil society and philanthropy actors that work across the Arab region. I'm half Palestinian on my father's side, and I'm half Egyptian on my mother's. And I'm not going to lie to you, as you can probably imagine, I've spent the entirety of the past 9.5 months in complete and utter horror. Nothing about my world has been normal since October 7th. Nothing about my work has been normal since October 7th. Nothing about how I envision my future and that of my fellow Palestinians, whether they are my friends or my family and my colleagues alike, has been normal. And so by extension, nothing I have known, believed in, or hoped for in my sector and professionally has been normal. In many ways, I've been so moved, and I'm eternally grateful for some of the most stalwart solidarity by global peers, some of whom are with me in this room today, whose support I will never, ever forget. And I'm keeping receipts. In other and more painful ways, I've been horrified by the silence or indifference of some peers at the very best, or the outright animosity and vitriol at worst. Each day of the past 9.5 months has proven to be more horrific, if that's possible, and more painful than the one that came before it. And I honestly don't know how many more images of headless babies and innocent mourning and grieving mothers and fathers that we can bear witness to without being permanently scarred and traumatized. But I don't want to spend our time together describing in detail the horrors of this genocide, because if we do, we won't make it through the rest of the week, much less the rest of today. So instead, what I'd like to spend some time on is to share some of my reflections on how all of this relates to us, the people in this room. We who represent the philanthropy and development sector. What I hope that me sharing these reflections will do is to serve as an open invitation to all of you to share your thoughts with me and with each other in the days to come and then beyond that. And what I want us to think about and to reflect on together is this. We are on the precipice of a global shift. I know that we all feel it, and I know that we all know it. But I'm not sure that we know what to do about it. And more importantly, I don't know if we know how to do anything about it. And I'm hoping that by sharing our thoughts and our ideas with each other, we will find the fixes and will hopefully come up with some really urgently needed solutions to how we can address this shift and how we can build a new world order that improves on the one that we already have. Because honestly, this one is failing. And it is failing us. And I don't want to make it sound as though I think that Gaza is the only crisis in the world today, because obviously it's not. And God knows that we're faced with many, some of which are taking place on this continent as we speak. And I think of the Congo and Sudan and Yemen, to name just but a few. But for some reason, Gaza has found itself in the most unfortunate position of serving as an example, and not simply as a litmus test for moral clarity and justice, but as a reflection of the various aspects of our lives that are impacted by it. Our politics, our values, our activism, and our philanthropy. And what the genocide in Gaza has unmasked, at least for me, is the failure of so many of the institutions which I was taught to rely on. The events of the past 9.5 months have forced me to confront some very, very glaring questions, however. Like, how can we trust and depend on the universities that we've been told are the beacons of intellectual supremacy when we witness these same institutions crack down with violence on the students they are obligated by a duty of care to protect? And even more so, what kind of a world is it where the violence is being brought upon a population, most of whom are under the age of 21, who are protesting an unjust war and the systematic murder of a significant population of children? Where are we headed when institutions that are meant to enlighten and empower our youth are in fact literally beating the morality and humanity out of them? And importantly, how are we continuing to fund these institutions? And beyond universities, there's the issue of banking and the mechanisms that have systematically created insurmountable obstacles for our sector, particularly in the global south, and placed our work and our efforts in jeopardy, often based on the whims and racially motivated prejudices of those who control them. Why do we have to continue to rely on these institutions? You know that we can build alternative models, right? Like, there's literally no rule that says we can't do that. And we can encourage and take pride in alternative educational models and institutions that support and defend our youth and empower them, rather than suppress them, rather than kowtow to oppressive genocidal regimes. And as a side note, by the way, am I the only one who didn't realize how many universities were investing in genocide and apartheid? Because I have to be honest, that was kind of shocking for me. We have these alternative institutions in our regions, and they will surpass the Harvards and the Columbias because they can. And they should. And we, the people in this room, and other rooms like it, should be doing everything that we can to make sure that these institutions are well-funded and well-supported. And there are those among us who are already thinking of ways to design alternative financing models for the sector. We should be putting our efforts towards helping and supporting these groups. Again, who says we can't have a banking model that respects our needs and our social and cultural contexts? What would happen if enough of us were to take a stand against Western imperialist hegemonic systems and just said, no thank you, we'll find our own way? And I don't say this to imply a separation or a scenario of us versus them, far from it. But what I am hoping to explore, and I want to build momentum around, is a reality where the shift of power, this changing landscape where the center of gravity, metaphorically speaking, is no longer housed in the global north, is acknowledged. And with that acknowledgement, I invite our global north peers to step up to the responsibilities that come with having had the privilege of power for so long. Use that privilege to empower your peers in the global south. Share your hard-earned wisdom and the power of your experience to uplift and support our success. Like it or not, these shifts are coming, and they are uncomfortable, I know. And to be completely frank, we could all use a bit of discomfort, because our comfort has led us down a pretty dangerous path. And this brings me back to Gaza, because it serves as an example, once again, of what can happen when we worry too much about making folks uncomfortable. As a point of comparison, when the Russian invasion of Ukraine occurred, the response from the global philanthropy sector was astonishing. I serve on 8 international boards. Okay, I know, I say yes to way too many things. And every single one of the boards that I serve on that represents organizations in the global north had something to say about it. Strong, determined, clear statements were immediately released. Alliances and funding agreements with Russian donors were canceled in acts of defiant moral clarity and maybe some virtue signaling. And almost $120 billion of philanthropic support have been committed for Ukraine in that time. It's impressive, right? I mean, this is what the sector is capable of. So I'm going to give you one guess. How many of those things have played out in the sector since October 7th? Exactly. None. None of those things have happened. Of the Global North boards that I serve on, not one has made a single meaningful statement of solidarity for Palestine and the genocide against the Palestinian people. Not one. There have been some lukewarm statements, mostly pledging support for some variation of both sides, and almost no meaningful philanthropic money has been mobilized to support Palestine. Listen, Palestinian or not, this sickens me to my core. And no amount of hemming and hawing will deter me from asking the obvious, really uncomfortable questions. Is it because we're not white? Is it because we're not rich? Is it because our babies are brown and snot-faced and dirty? And what about our babies who are blonde and blue-eyed? Because just FYI, many Palestinians, look at me for example, are not blonde, maybe granted, but green-eyed and pretty fair-skinned. I don't have adequate words to describe the pain that I feel when I see my people having to resort to begging for the world's empathy. Because if you know anything about Palestinians, you know that we don't want sympathy. You may not notice it, but when our fundraisers are shared along with pictures of blonde, red-haired, blue and green-eyed children, we know that these pictures are intentional. We know they are shared in the hopes of moving you to see us as humans. Because we know the world is more inclined to value those children more than the ones that are darker skinned and more terrorist tinged. It's tragic, but it's true, and it's despicable. There's a word that we have in Arabic, al-qahr, which has no translation in any other language, at least nothing suitable enough to encompass the levels of pain, helplessness, despair, and anguish that the word evokes. When I consider the global institutional philanthropy response to this genocide, or the lack thereof, even as part of a larger consideration on how we function as global citizens beyond the sector, I feel qahr. But I also feel, surprisingly, a sense of hope. Let me explain. I feel hopeful amidst this tragedy because of the privilege of my position. Yes, the ability to work within a sector that is agile, flexible, can mobilize capital relatively quickly, and is well networked to support large segments of communities in need is an absolute privilege that none of us want, necessarily, but we are lucky to have it. Imagine feeling this qahr without having an avenue to channel it. It would be torture. And I'm also hopeful because in contrast to the lack of any support from the philanthropy sector as a whole, and I am not negating the efforts that are made by the handful of philanthropies in the region and beyond that have actually done something. I know they exist and they are wonderful, but it is not enough. Do you know who has stepped in to support Palestine? Do you know how almost 120,000 Palestinians have been able to flee Gaza for safety in Egypt? Individual crowdfunding. Everyday folks, my friends, my families, your families, our colleagues have stepped up in a big way to fill the glaring gap that our sector has left gaping wide. And while this gives me hope in the humanity that abounds, it also hurts me to see my people having to beg like this for life-saving support that could so easily be mobilized if the sector wasn't so damn cowardly. So, what does all this mean in the broader sense as it relates to our beloved sector? Well, beyond the things that we've already discussed, beyond the alternative models and reimagined institutions and more vocal advocacy, what are some of the truths that we need to confront and address? And this is where things tend to run away from me. So again, be thankful for time limits. One of the things that I've been thinking about and really pondering is how do we, as we design and reimagine a sector in a shifting global reality, ensure that the models that we usher in are stronger, more equitable, and more inclusive than the ones that we have now? And how do we incorporate the best of the models that already exist and include the parts of us and our context that aren't represented? So short of burning the whole thing down, which I've been accused of encouraging falsely, mind you, what are the ways that we can build a better sector? We've heard about radical movements in our sector to decolonize aid and shift the power, right? We've all heard of them. And these movements are radical only because they have not been previously articulated in the ways that we see them articulated today. They are the embodiments of the things that we've whispered in the past, the words that we've used to declare our desires, but haven't been bold enough to utter aloud. And we're uttering them more loudly now, right? And this is the part of the shift that we're witnessing, but it's still not enough. Look, I say all of this as someone who comes from a line of colonized identities. Again, I'm Egyptian, Palestinian, I mean, seriously. And maybe this is a result of my age, or maybe it's a consequence of the clarity that one gets when confronted with the genocide of one's people. But I've had to go through a process of decolonizing my own brain. So before I can decolonize aid, I need to disavow myself of all the notions that I've previously held sacred because they have not served me. And quite the contrary, they've oppressed me. And I have only myself to blame for that. When I tell you the realization and epiphany that dawned on me when I realized that I had harbored negative images and perceptions of my own people for so long, I'm almost embarrassed to admit it. And this realization came to me in a very vulnerable moment. Early on in this genocide, I found myself sobbing uncontrollably at images of Palestinian men in Gaza as they cradled, held, lovingly comforted, and tended to young children, or in some cases were holding murdered babies. And I recognized in myself the fact that I had never considered my fellow Palestinian men as loving, tender, affectionate beings. Somehow, the tropes that the West has peddled to us had made their way and embedded themselves into my own consciousness and my own perception. And the biggest lie the West has ever had me believe was that my people were somehow less worthy of love, compassion, and respect. And I will never allow that to happen again because I would never be able to forgive myself. So divorcing ourselves from these long-held myths about ourselves is the first step towards decolonizing our sector. And we'll do that not only by not allowing it to infiltrate our thoughts about ourselves, but we will call it out when it's being done by others, even those among us. Again, who's going to stop us? And we have only ourselves to hold accountable. So what does this look like? Well, for one thing, it looks like taking a stand against the things that don't serve us. The systems, the institutions, the donors, the funding mechanisms, all of it. If it doesn't serve us and our needs, if it doesn't respect us, then we reject it. Truly, this is not a radical suggestion. It's simply a notion of self-respect, and my goodness, we've earned it. And for another thing, we must collaborate. Truly, enough already. We talk about this incessantly, and we do it in bits and pieces, but we must be more purposeful and thoughtful about how we collaborate. So here is my pledge to all of you. And I'm doing this publicly because I work very well under duress and with self-imposed accountability metrics. I'll tell you once in another conversation about how I finally quit smoking after 30 years. Hint, it was by making a public declaration just like this one. But anyway, I digress. What I will declare here is that at every Arab Foundations Forum meeting, which we host every 2 years, I will designate at least 2 sessions for my peers and colleagues from across the Global South to curate and host, whatever you want to talk about. Whatever topics are relevant to your context, whatever issues you feel the rest of us need to know about or can support you in, you will have that opportunity to share it with our network, and we will highlight and amplify your voice, your causes, and your needs. And I make this commitment to you today, and I urge you all to reciprocate in the ways that make sense for you. Another thing I'll commit to, oh my God, my team is gonna kill me. But I will feature your articles, your blog posts, your research, your data, your calls for proposals, your perspectives. Just send them our way and we will amplify the heck out of them. Find me, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I will direct you to our amazing comms director. And you can be sure that your voices will be featured in our quarterly newsletters and across all of our other platforms. You know, these are simple things that we can do. And it's also the least that we can do for each other. Beyond that, we need to remember that we are connected in so many ways. Our lives are connected. What happens over there absolutely matters over here. If we ignore Gaza today, then we're allowing ourselves to ignore the Congo and Yemen and Sudan and Syria, and the list goes on, and wherever else our attention is needed. My advocacy helps us all. Your research supports mine. My data will inform yours. My network is incredibly rich with lessons and expertise that can benefit you, and I know that your network can offer the same. One thing is for sure, we will not be decolonizing anyone or anything if we try to do it alone. So, let us commit to doing away with the platitudes and instead make declarative commitments to each other on how we will be guided by actions. So let's take the shift of power movement literally and enact these strategies that will actually bring about these shifts. Let's implement the principles that form the foundations for decolonizing aid and act on them every single day in the work that we do and the people that we work with and for. Let's imagine the ways in which we together can build mechanisms that will be readily deployed when the time comes for our communities in need to rebuild, Gaza being chief among them, but not the only one. Let us reject the funding that is accompanied by restrictions that marginalize us and negate our cultural contexts and values. Let's reject the systems and institutions that oppress us into silence and make it vulgar for us to speak out against genocide. I mean, my God, that we even have to say this. But yeah, let's do that. So, with just a couple of seconds to spare, I've said everything I want to say today. Please find me over the next 2 days and let me know how we can do this together. And I'm really serious. This is not like I'm not being. This is not a shallow invitation. So with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for indulging me over the last 20 minutes or so. And as I will always say, until it comes true, may we see a brighter, more just future for all, and free Palestine.